Imagine sharing a room with someone you've known forever. My stepbrother did it on a shared hotel bed, with our parents just in the next room. For Sam and Lily, one family vacation changes everything. Long silences, quiet glances, and a bond they're not sure they should even explore. As their time together ends, they're left asking, what happens now? Can they ever go back, or have they crossed a line that can't be undone? Sam and Lily were on a family vacation, finally arriving at a quiet coastal hotel after a long drive. It was supposed to be the perfect break from everything, a chance to unwind and escape the stress of school, work, and city life. The hotel was tucked away by the beach, promising a relaxing few days with ocean views and the sound of waves right outside their windows. As they entered the hotel lobby, their parents looked excited and already in vacation mode, smiling and chatting about dinner plans. Lily felt herself relax just a bit. After hours in the car, she was ready to settle in. But as they approached the front desk to check in, things didn't go exactly as planned. The front desk clerk was tapping away at a keyboard, a slightly concerned look on her face. "I'm so sorry," she said, glancing up at them. "It appears there's been an error with your booking." Lily's dad furrowed his brow, leaning forward. "What kind of error?" "It seems we only have 2 rooms available for you instead of 3, the clerk replied apologetically. She pointed to the screen, showing their reservation details. "Unfortunately, we're fully booked at the moment, so we don't have a 3rd room available." Her dad sighed, clearly disappointed. "Is there any way to make an exception?" But the clerk shook her head, looking truly sorry. "I wish we could, but with the holiday season, every room has already been filled." Lily's mom exchanged a look with her husband, and they quickly seemed to agree on a plan. "All right," her mom said with a light-hearted smile. "Then Sam and Lily can share the 2nd room. It's just for a couple of nights." Sam didn't seem fazed at all. He turned to Lily with a shrug. "Looks like we're roommates," he said with a small grin. Lily forced a smile in return, nodding. "Yeah, guess so." It wasn't that sharing a room with Sam was a big deal. They were family, after all. But the idea of sharing such close quarters felt strange. Still, it was only temporary, so she pushed down the uneasy feeling and told herself it was fine. With their room keys in hand, the family made their way to the elevator. Sam and Lily's parents were talking excitedly about dinner options and which beaches they wanted to visit. Sam seemed relaxed, already settling into the vacation spirit. He nudged Lily as they waited for the elevator to arrive. "You're not too bummed about the room situation, right?" he asked lightly. Lily shook her head, brushing it off. "Nah, I'm fine. It'll be an adventure." When they reached their floor, they split up to go to their respective rooms. Sam and Lily found theirs at the end of the hallway. The room was simple, with a single bed in the center, a small window facing the street, and a few pieces of plain furniture. It was a bit cramped, but comfortable enough. Sam tossed his backpack onto the bed, kicking off his shoes and flopping down without a second thought. "Not bad," he said, stretching out and putting his hands behind his head. Lily set her suitcase by the dresser, glancing around. "Yeah, cozy," she replied, trying to sound casual, but she couldn't shake the awkward feeling creeping up on her. It was just different, sharing a room like this. As they unpacked a few things, Lily moved around the room, trying to stay out of Sam's way. It was odd, this forced closeness, especially since they'd always had their own space at home. She grabbed her toothbrush and a change of clothes, heading into the bathroom to get ready for bed. The sooner they could settle in, the sooner they'd both fall asleep, and she could ignore how strange this whole situation felt. After a quick shower, Lily came out to find Sam already under the covers, his eyes half closed as he scrolled through his phone. He looked up as she entered the room, giving her a lazy grin. "All set?" he asked. "Yep," she replied, flicking off the bathroom light and climbing into bed beside him. She lay stiffly on her side, pulling the blanket up around her shoulders, while Sam seemed perfectly relaxed, sinking into the pillows. "Good night," he mumbled, already sounding half asleep. "Good night," she replied quietly, staring up at the ceiling. She tried to relax, to let sleep take over, but her mind was buzzing. The room was quiet, Save for Sam's slow, steady breathing beside her, she turned over carefully, hoping not to disturb him, and tried to focus on the sound of the waves outside. But sleep wouldn't come. She felt strangely aware of Sam beside her, even as he drifted off, oblivious. It was only the first night, and already, this arrangement felt like it was going to be more challenging than she'd expected. After a few moments, Lily noticed how quiet the room was. She tried not to think about it, but every little sound, like the rustle of Sam's movements or the click of his phone, felt amplified. Normally, she'd be watching a movie or scrolling through her own phone before bed, but right now, she was too aware of her surroundings to feel comfortable. "Do you mind if I turn off the light?" Sam asked suddenly, looking over at her with a casual smile. "Oh, sure," she replied quickly, grateful for the dimness that followed. She settled into her spot on the bed, feeling oddly tense as she tried to make herself comfortable. She told herself to just relax and get some rest. After all, they had plans for the next day, and she didn't want to be exhausted. A little while later, Sam turned to her, his voice breaking the quiet. "You awake?" he asked softly. Lily shifted, turning her head in his direction. "Yeah. Kind of weird, huh? Sharing a room, I mean," he said, his tone light. She let out a small laugh, nodding. "Yeah, it's different. Not something we usually do." Sam chuckled, running a hand through his hair. "Well, just think of it as a fun memory we'll laugh about later," he said, trying to keep things casual. "Not every day you end up sharing a room with your sibling, right?" "True," Lily replied with a smile, trying to mirror his ease. But despite her efforts, the awkward feeling persisted. She told herself it was just the newness of the situation, something she'd get used to by tomorrow. But lying there beside him, with only inches separating them, her mind kept racing. After a few minutes, Sam broke the silence again, trying to lighten the mood. "You remember our road trip from last summer?" he asked, a hint of a smile in his voice. Lily nodded, relaxing a bit. "Yeah. The one where the GPS kept rerouting us to that weird side road." Sam laughed. "Exactly. And then we got lost in that small town with no signal and had to rely on, what was it? A paper map?" "A real adventure," Lily replied, chuckling softly. "We ended up at that strange diner, remember?" Sam grinned. "How could I forget? The place looked straight out of a movie, and I think we were the only ones there for miles." They both laughed, easing the tension that had filled the room. Talking about the road trip reminded them of how easily they'd gotten along during that time. It was strange. Back then, things felt so normal between them. But now, sharing a room seemed to have shifted something. As the room grew quiet again, Lily glanced over, realizing Sam had settled back into bed, looking more relaxed than before. She closed her eyes, hoping to drift off soon, but her thoughts wouldn't stop. Finally, Sam's steady breathing told her he'd fallen asleep. She lay there, her own breathing quiet, and listened to the sound of the waves outside. It was calming, almost like a lullaby. Maybe, she thought, if she focused on that sound, she could fall asleep too. She tried to push the awkwardness aside, reminding herself that it was just one night. Tomorrow, they'd be back to normal. This little hiccup in their vacation would be just that, a small, forgettable moment. With that thought, she finally began to drift off, letting the ocean's rhythm carry her into sleep. The next morning, Lily woke up to the soft light filtering through the curtains. For a second, she'd forgotten where she was, but as she glanced over, she saw Sam still asleep, lying comfortably on his side. She tried to move quietly, hoping not to wake him. She got out of bed and quietly grabbed her clothes, heading to the bathroom to get ready. As she brushed her teeth, she looked at herself in the mirror, thinking about how strange last night had felt. She hadn't expected it to be such an adjustment. But this morning, with daylight streaming in, everything felt more normal. When she came back into the room, she noticed Sam starting to stir. He stretched, blinking at her with a sleepy smile. "Morning," he mumbled, his voice groggy. "Morning," Lily replied, a bit more at ease now. As he got up and began rummaging through his bag, she realized they'd have to get used to sharing this small space, at least for another day. She watched him for a moment, feeling a little awkward, then turned to open the window and let in the fresh ocean air. Once they were both ready, they joined their parents in the hotel dining area for breakfast. The smell of coffee and freshly baked pastries filled the room, and everyone seemed cheerful. Their parents greeted them with smiles, asking if they'd slept well. "It was fine," Lily said with a shrug, trying to sound casual. Their mom smiled knowingly. "It's a little different, huh? But you two seem to manage well together." Sam gave Lily a playful nudge. "Yeah, we're pretty good roommates," he joked, making Lily laugh. In moments like these, it was easy to forget the awkwardness from last night. After breakfast, they decided to explore the nearby beach. The sun was shining brightly, and the sand was warm under their feet. They walked together, chatting about the places they wanted to visit during the trip. The awkwardness from the night before seemed to fade with each step. After walking along the shore for a while, Sam and Lily found a spot to sit, watching the waves roll in. They didn't speak much, just relaxed in each other's company. It felt peaceful, and for a while, Lily forgot about the oddness of last night. When they finally returned to the hotel, they were both sandy and a little sunburnt, laughing about how they'd both forgotten sunscreen. They headed to their room to clean up and get ready for dinner with their parents, who'd been exploring on their own. As the evening went on, everything felt a bit more comfortable, the initial awkwardness now a distant memory. By the time they went to bed that night, it felt almost normal, like they'd always shared this small space. Tomorrow was a new day, and for now, they both drifted off, more at ease than they had been. First night, and initial tension. Later that night, Sam and Lily were back in their room, getting ready to settle in for the night. They'd spent the evening out with their parents, exploring the beach and then enjoying a long relaxed dinner at a small restaurant nearby. It had been a good day, and by now, they were both exhausted. Back in the room, Sam tossed his shoes off by the door and sank down onto the bed, stretching out with a contented sigh. "It's been a while since I've been this tired," he mumbled, rubbing his eyes. Lily smiled, pulling her hair back as she unpacked her things. "Yeah, I didn't realize how much walking we did," she replied, glancing around the room. It was dimly lit now, with just the bedside lamp casting a warm glow across the space. The comfortable quiet between them felt almost familiar by now. Sam looked over at her, his expression relaxed. "You mind if I turn the light off?" "Go ahead," Lily replied, moving to sit on her side of the bed as he flicked off the lamp. The room plunged into darkness, and for a moment, they lay there in silence, listening to the faint hum of the hotel's air conditioning and the distant sound of waves outside. They both lay on their backs, staring up at the ceiling, each wrapped in their own thoughts. Lily found herself hyper-aware of the small space between them. The bed felt a bit smaller tonight, as if there was barely enough room to stretch out without accidentally bumping into him. Finally, Sam broke the silence. "Hey, you remember that camping trip we took with Dad a few years ago?" Lily turned her head slightly, surprised. "Yeah, of course. The one where we got rained out." "Exactly. I remember you were so mad because all your stuff got soaked," he said, his voice carrying a hint of a smile. "We ended up spending the whole night huddled in that tiny tent, waiting for the storm to pass." Lily laughed softly, shaking her head. "I thought that tent was going to blow away with the wind." Sam chuckled, shifting slightly. "Good times," he murmured. "Funny how even the worst parts end up being the best memories." She smiled at that, feeling a sense of comfort settle over them. Talking about that trip brought back memories of simpler times, of late-night conversations and shared laughter that seemed to melt away any tension. But even as she smiled, a part of her couldn't ignore the unfamiliar feeling that crept in now. "Good night, Sam," she whispered, rolling over and closing her eyes. "Good night, Lil," he replied softly. The next morning, they both woke early, the light streaming through the window before either of them was ready to get up. Sam stretched, groaning as he rubbed his eyes. "Morning," he mumbled, still half asleep. Lily sat up, rubbing her own eyes as she tried to shake off the sleepiness. "Morning," she replied, glancing around the room. For a brief moment, the awkwardness returned, like the faintest echo of last night's strange tension. They got ready in silence, taking turns in the bathroom, brushing their teeth, and changing into fresh clothes. When they were finally ready, they headed down to meet their parents for breakfast, exchanging small talk on the way. Their parents greeted them warmly, already discussing plans for the day. They decided to visit a nearby lighthouse, followed by a little shopping in the town's main square. Sam and Lily went along, feeling a bit more at ease as the morning wore on. The family spent hours exploring, wandering through the local shops, and chatting about the things they saw. They took pictures, sampled snacks from street vendors, and eventually ended up by the waterfront, where a few sailboats were moored. As the day went on, Sam and Lily found themselves alone again, sitting on a bench by the water while their parents wandered off to browse a nearby shop. "This place is nice," Sam said, gazing out over the water. "Feels like time slows down here." Lily nodded, leaning back against the bench. "Yeah, I kind of wish we could stay longer." Sam glanced over at her. "Maybe we should plan more trips like this. Just us, the family. Simple stuff, you know?" She smiled, nodding. "Yeah, that'd be nice." For a moment, they sat there in comfortable silence, simply enjoying the peaceful view. But as they sat there, Lily felt that strange tension again, the one that seemed to linger whenever they were alone together. She didn't understand it, but she felt it, a quiet, unspoken weight that seemed to settle between them. That evening, after a long day out, they returned to the hotel, exhausted once more. They showered, changed into their pajamas, and settled into bed without saying much, both too tired to talk. The room was quiet, the only sound being their steady breathing and the occasional hum from the air conditioner. As she lay there, staring up at the ceiling, Lily tried to relax. She told herself to stop overthinking, to let the day's tiredness take over and pull her into sleep. But it wasn't that easy. Her thoughts kept drifting, her mind racing with questions she didn't know how to answer. Beside her, Sam shifted, rolling onto his side, his breathing slowing as he began to drift off. She envied how easily he seemed to fall asleep, how unbothered he appeared. She wished she could do the same, to just close her eyes and let go. But that strange tension was still there, filling the silence between them like an unspoken question. She tried to ignore it, tried to convince herself it was just her mind playing tricks on her. But in the quiet darkness, with nothing to distract her, it was hard to ignore. Finally, she turned over, facing away from him, and closed her eyes. She took a deep breath, willing herself to relax, to let go of whatever was bothering her. She told herself that by tomorrow, it would be easier, that whatever strange feeling lingered tonight would be gone by morning. With that thought, she finally began to drift off, letting the quiet of the room lull her into sleep. The following day passed in a similar way. They went on another outing with their parents, wandering through more shops and exploring the area. The family laughed, shared stories, and enjoyed each other's company, making memories they would look back on fondly. But even with all the laughter and the easy moments, Lily felt that quiet tension following her like a shadow. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but it was there, an odd awareness that crept in whenever she and Sam were alone. That night, as they lay in bed once again, Lily stared up at the ceiling, feeling the weight of unspoken words press down on her. She wondered if Sam felt it too, or if it was just her overthinking everything. "Can't sleep?" Sam's voice broke the silence, surprising her. "Yeah," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. He turned to look at her, his expression unreadable in the darkness. "Me neither." They lay there in silence for a while, the unspoken tension between them filling the room. Finally, Sam spoke, his voice soft. "Do you ever feel like things are just different now?" Lily hesitated, unsure of how to answer. "Yeah, I guess so. I don't know why, but it's like I can't ignore it," he said, his voice trailing off. She nodded, feeling a strange sense of relief at his words. She wasn't alone in this. Whatever this strange tension was, he felt it too. They didn't have to name it, didn't have to define it. But at least now, she knew it wasn't just her. As they lay there, neither of them spoke again. But somehow, the silence felt different, less heavy, less strange. They didn't have the answers, didn't know what any of it meant. But for now, it was enough to know they both felt it, that they weren't alone in whatever this was. And as they drifted off to sleep, the unspoken words lingered, a quiet understanding that hung in the air between them. The next morning, Lily was the first to wake up, with the room still dim in the early light. She got up quietly, not wanting to disturb Sam, and slipped out to the small balcony attached to their room. The air was fresh, carrying the scent of salt and the faint sounds of seagulls in the distance. She leaned on the railing, taking in the view. The ocean stretched out before her, peaceful and endless, with waves gently lapping against the shore. There was something calming about it, something that helped clear her mind, even if just for a moment. She heard a rustling behind her and turned to see Sam, still groggy, rubbing his eyes as he stepped out onto the balcony. "Couldn't sleep either, huh?" he asked, giving her a sleepy smile. Lily shook her head, glancing out over the water again. "I guess not." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, each lost in their own thoughts. Eventually, Sam leaned over the railing beside her, staring out at the waves. "It's weird, isn't it?" he said softly, breaking the silence. Lily turned to look at him, unsure of what he meant. "What is?" He shrugged, not looking at her. "Just everything. This place, us being here, sharing a room. It's all just different." She nodded slowly, understanding what he meant. It was different, but she couldn't quite explain why. It was as if something had shifted between them, something that neither of them had fully acknowledged yet. After a while, they went back inside to get ready for the day. They moved around the room, packing their things and preparing for another day of exploring. The quiet moments from that morning hung between them, unspoken but present, like a thread connecting them in ways they couldn't fully grasp. The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity. They visited a nearby lighthouse, climbed to the top to take in the view, and spent the afternoon wandering through a small art gallery in town. Their parents were full of enthusiasm, taking pictures and chatting with the locals, while Sam and Lily followed along, enjoying the simple pleasure of being somewhere new. That evening, back in their room, they both felt the weight of the day's events, exhausted but content. They settled into bed in silence, each lost in their own thoughts as they lay there, staring up at the ceiling. In the quiet, Lily found herself thinking back to their conversation that morning, the things that had gone unspoken between them. She wanted to ask Sam about it, to understand what he was feeling, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she turned onto her side, closing her eyes and letting the quiet fill the space between them. But sleep didn't come easily. She lay there, her mind racing with questions she didn't know how to answer. As she drifted in and out of sleep, she felt the strange tension between them, like an unspoken weight pressing down on her. The following morning, they both woke up to sunlight streaming through the curtains, bringing a warmth to the room that made it feel more welcoming than the night before. Sam glanced over at Lily, offering her a small smile as he stretched. "Ready for another day?" Lily nodded, returning the smile. "Yeah, let's make the most of it." As they got ready, the comfortable silence between them felt easier, the unspoken understanding from the night before hanging lightly in the air. They didn't have all the answers, but for now, it was enough to just enjoy the time they had. Daytime activities and growing awareness. The next morning, the family had planned a day trip to a small, charming town along the coast. Sam and Lily gathered their things, each readying quietly in their own way. When they were all set, they joined their parents downstairs, where a rental car was waiting to take them to the day's adventures. The drive along the coastal road was breathtaking, with endless views of the ocean stretching out beside them. Lily stared out the window, letting the scenery wash over her, feeling the fresh ocean air through the slightly open window. Beside her, Sam was tapping his fingers on his knee, humming along to the music playing softly on the radio. She glanced over at him, noticing how relaxed he looked, how easygoing he always seemed, even in moments that felt oddly tense for her. As the car pulled up to the town, they all got out, stretching their legs and taking in the new surroundings. The town was quaint, with cobblestone streets and little shops lining the main road. A light breeze swept through, carrying the smell of fresh bread from a nearby bakery. Their parents decided to head off to explore some antique shops, leaving Sam and Lily to wander on their own. "Why don't we meet up in a couple of hours?" their mom suggested with a smile. "Sounds good," Sam replied, glancing over at Lily. "Let's go see what this place has to offer." They strolled down the street, taking in the sights and sounds around them. They stopped by a little cafe, grabbed some iced coffees, and continued exploring, occasionally pausing to peek into a shop window or point out something interesting. As they walked, they passed a small art gallery tucked away on a side street. Lily stopped, glancing inside. "Want to check it out?" she asked, looking over at Sam. He nodded, a curious smile on his face. "Sure, why not?" They stepped inside, the quiet of the gallery a welcome contrast to the bustling streets outside. The walls were lined with paintings of coastal scenes, waves crashing against rocks, boats bobbing in the harbor, sunsets casting golden light across the water. The soft light in the gallery created a warm atmosphere, making everything feel calm and serene. They wandered through the gallery, occasionally pausing to comment on a particular piece or exchange thoughts about the art. At one point, they found themselves standing side by side, looking at a painting of a couple walking along the beach at sunset. The colors were soft, blending together in a way that made the scene look almost dreamlike. "It's beautiful," Lily murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. Sam nodded, his gaze fixed on the painting. "Yeah, there's something peaceful about it." They stood there in silence for a moment, each lost in thought. Lily glanced over at Sam, noticing the thoughtful expression on his face. She felt a strange warmth in that moment, an unspoken understanding between them that went beyond words. After they left the gallery, they continued wandering around the town, stopping by various shops and taking pictures along the way. They laughed, shared stories, and enjoyed the simplicity of just being together. At one point, they passed a small bookstore, its window filled with colorful displays. Lily's eyes lit up. "Can we go in?" Sam chuckled, nodding. "Of course, I should have known you'd find the one bookstore in this town." They stepped inside, the faint smell of old books filling the air. Lily wandered through the aisles, her fingers brushing along the spines of various novels, while Sam lingered nearby, glancing at the shelves. She picked up a book, flipping through the pages, a small smile on her face. "Remember when we were kids, and I'd always drag you to the library?" Sam laughed, nodding. "Oh yeah, you'd go straight for the biggest stack of books you could carry. I'd usually just sit and wait for you to finish." She smiled, remembering those days fondly. It was moments like these that made her feel a sense of closeness with him, a bond that had grown over the years. But even with that comfort, there was still a subtle tension, an awareness that had begun to linger between them. After spending some time in the bookstore, they headed back out to meet up with their parents for lunch. They found a cozy little restaurant by the water, where they sat outside, enjoying the sun and the view. As they ate, their parents chatted about the antiques they'd found, laughing about a particularly eccentric shop owner they'd met. Sam and Lily joined in, adding their own stories from the day, and for a while, everything felt easy and light. But as the conversation slowed, Lily found herself glancing over at Sam, catching his eye for just a moment before looking away. She couldn't quite explain it, but something about this trip was making her see him in a different light. He was still Sam, her stepbrother, the person she'd grown up with. But there was a new layer to their connection, something unspoken that hung in the air between them. After lunch, they continued exploring the town together, visiting more shops and taking in the sights. By late afternoon, they were all feeling the effects of the long day, and they decided to head back to the hotel to rest before dinner. That evening, back at the hotel, they all gathered in the lobby, ready for a relaxed dinner at a nearby restaurant. Sam and Lily's parents were in high spirits, clearly enjoying the time away from home, and their laughter filled the air as they walked through the town. At dinner, Sam and Lily sat across from each other, exchanging glances and smiles as they listened to their parents' stories. There was an ease between them, a comfort that had grown stronger over the course of the day. But even with that comfort, the subtle tension still lingered. Every shared glance, every quiet moment, seemed to carry an extra weight. Lily couldn't ignore it, and she wondered if Sam felt it too. After dinner, they all took a slow walk back to the hotel, the town quieting down for the night. When they reached their floor, their parents said goodnight and headed to their room, leaving Sam and Lily standing in the hallway together. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They simply looked at each other, an unspoken understanding passing between them. Finally, Sam gave her a small smile. "Guess it's time to turn in," he said softly. Lily nodded, a faint smile on her lips. "Yeah, good night, Sam." "Good night, Lil." With that, they went to their room, each lost in their own thoughts as they prepared for bed. The day had been filled with laughter and light moments, but as they settled in for the night, the quiet tension returned, filling the space between them once again. As she lay there, staring up at the ceiling, Lily felt a mix of emotions she couldn't fully understand. She didn't know what this feeling was or why it had started. All she knew was that things felt different now, and she wasn't sure if they could ever go back to the way they were before. After dinner, Sam and Lily decided to take a short walk along the beach while their parents returned to the hotel. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the ocean, and the air was cool, carrying the faint scent of salt and sand. They walked in comfortable silence, their feet sinking slightly into the sand with each step. The waves rolled in and out beside them, their steady rhythm creating a peaceful backdrop. As they walked, Sam turned to her with a small smile. "You know, this is probably one of the best vacations we've had in a while." Lily nodded, a soft smile on her lips. "Yeah, it feels nice to just relax and not have a schedule. It's like we can just be." They continued walking, each lost in thought until they reached a small rock formation jutting out into the water. Sam climbed up first, holding out a hand to help Lily. She hesitated for a moment, feeling a strange flutter in her chest, but she took his hand, letting him pull her up. They sat together, watching as the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the sand. The quiet between them felt different now, like a shared understanding that didn't need words. "Remember when we used to go to the lake every summer?" Sam asked, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Lily smiled, nodding. "Yeah, I think I was 7 the first time we went. You taught me how to swim that summer." He chuckled softly, glancing at her. "You were so determined, even though you were terrified of the water." Lily laughed, the memory bringing back a flood of childhood moments. "Well, I guess I had a good teacher." They sat there, watching as the sky turned shades of pink and orange, each lost in the past for a while. It felt strange to think about those days now, how much had changed, and how they'd grown together over the years. When the sun finally dipped below the horizon, they made their way back to the hotel, walking in the growing dusk. The town had quieted down, and as they passed by the shops and restaurants, the only sounds were the faint murmur of distant conversations and the soft hum of streetlights flickering on. Back in their room, they each got ready for bed in silence, the familiar routine now feeling oddly comforting. As Lily climbed into bed, she glanced over at Sam, who was sitting on the edge, looking thoughtful. He turned to her, a faint smile on his face. "I'm glad we came on this trip. Feels like it's been a while since we really just hung out." Lily nodded, a warmth spreading through her chest. "Yeah, me too." They exchanged a quiet look, a shared moment that lingered in the air. As they settled down for the night, Lily found herself lying there, wide awake, thinking about all the unspoken things that hung between them. The next day, they woke to the sound of waves crashing outside their window. It was another clear morning, with the sun casting a soft glow across the town. Sam stretched, glancing over at Lily with a sleepy smile. "Up for some early exploring?" Lily nodded, smiling back. "Definitely. Let's get out before it gets too crowded." They quickly got ready, quietly slipping out of the hotel room and making their way down to the beach. The sand was cool under their feet as they wandered along the shore, the town still quiet in the early morning light. It felt almost magical, as if they were the only two people in the world. They walked in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts, until Sam broke the quiet. "You know, it's nice to have moments like this, just us, with no one else around." Lily glanced over at him, a soft smile playing on her lips. "Yeah, it feels peaceful." They continued along the beach, stopping occasionally to pick up a seashell or skip a stone across the water. There was something calming about the rhythm of the waves, the endless stretch of ocean in front of them. For a while, they just existed together in silence, no words necessary. As they walked, they eventually came across a small pier jutting out into the water. Sam grinned, gesturing for her to follow him as he climbed up onto the pier, walking to the edge and peering down into the water. "Think there are any fish down there?" he asked, his eyes sparkling with curiosity. Lily laughed, joining him at the edge. Only one way to find out. They both leaned over, watching as the water lapped against the wooden beams beneath them. The quiet moments stretched on, and Lily felt a warmth settle over her, a sense of calm that she couldn't quite explain. After a while, they headed back to the hotel to meet their parents for breakfast. The day unfolded in much the same way as the others, exploring the town, taking in the sights, and sharing quiet moments together. But as the hours passed, Lily found herself growing more aware of Sam's presence, of the small details she'd never really noticed before. Later that afternoon, they returned to the beach, deciding to take a swim before dinner. The water was cool and refreshing, and they laughed as they splashed around, feeling carefree in the warm afternoon sun. At one point, Sam disappeared under the water, and Lily waited, glancing around as she searched for him. Suddenly, he popped up right beside her, spraying her with a handful of water and laughing at her surprised expression. "Sam!" she exclaimed, laughing as she tried to shield herself from the water. He grinned, shaking his head. "What?" Couldn't resist. They splashed each other back and forth, laughing and dodging each other's attempts to splash. It felt like they were kids again, lost in the moment, with nothing else in the world but the laughter and the water around them. When they finally climbed out, breathless and dripping with water, they sat side by side on the sand, watching the waves roll in. The sky was beginning to change color, a soft pink blending with the deepening blue as the sun started to set. Lily hugged her knees to her chest, glancing over at Sam. "This trip, it's different, isn't it?" Sam nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Yeah, it feels like things have changed. I can't really explain it, but it's like we're seeing each other in a new way." She nodded, understanding what he meant even if she couldn't put it into words. There was something about this place, this time together, that had brought them closer. It wasn't something she planned, but it was there, as undeniable as the waves crashing against the shore. They sat there in silence, each lost in their own thoughts, watching as the sun dipped lowered in the sky. As they sat there, Lily felt a quiet warmth spread through her, a feeling of connection that she couldn't quite name, but that felt real, like a thread that had always been there, just waiting to be noticed. The next morning, their parents suggested a hike along a nearby coastal trail. Sam and Lily agreed, gathering their things and heading out together with their parents. The trail was beautiful, winding along the cliffs with views of the ocean stretching out below. The sun was bright, and a gentle breeze kept the air cool as they climbed higher along the path. They walked in a comfortable rhythm, each taking in the scenery around them. At one point, they reached a scenic overlook, where they stopped to catch their breath and admire the view. The ocean sparkled in the sunlight, stretching endlessly to the horizon, and for a moment, everything felt perfectly still. Sam leaned against the railing, glancing over at Lily. "It's something, isn't it?" he murmured, his voice soft. She nodded, looking out at the ocean. "Yeah, it makes you feel small, in a good way." They stood there together, the quiet between them filled with the sound of waves crashing below. For a while, they didn't speak, just shared the moment, the unspoken bond between them feeling stronger than ever. As they continued on the trail, they found themselves drifting behind their parents, walking at their own pace. Sam reached out, plucking a wildflower from the side of the path and handing it to her with a small smile. "For you," he said playfully, his eyes twinkling. Lily laughed, accepting the flower. "Why, thank you," she replied, tucking it behind her ear. They shared a smile, a moment of lightness that felt easy and natural. The rest of the hike passed in much the same way. filled with laughter and shared glances that lingered a bit too long. By the time they reached the end of the trail, they were both exhausted but content, the day's experiences adding to the quiet understanding growing between them. That evening, after another long day together, they decided to take a final walk along the beach before heading to bed. The stars were out, scattered across the night sky, and the air was cool and crisp. They strolled along the shore, the sound of waves filling the quiet between them. Sam glanced over at her, his expression thoughtful. "This has been a different kind of trip," he said quietly. Lily nodded, understanding what he meant. "Yeah, it's been nice." They stopped, standing together at the water's edge, watching as the waves lapped against the sand. And in that moment, it felt as if everything that had gone unspoken between them was finally understood. They didn't need to say anything more. They just stood there, side by side, each feeling the quiet connection that had grown between them, a bond that had deepened over the days they'd spent together. With a final glance at each other, they turned back toward the hotel, walking in comfortable silence, the night wrapping around them like a blanket. The unspoken conversation, it was their last evening at the hotel, and there was a quiet, almost bittersweet feeling in the air. Sam and Lily knew they'd be heading home the next day, back to their separate rooms, their usual routines, and the familiar roles they'd always filled. But this trip had left a mark, and the idea of leaving it all behind felt strange. After a quiet dinner with their parents, they decided to take a final walk along the beach, the sunset casting a warm glow over the ocean. They didn't say much as they walked, the silence between them feeling comfortable, yet filled with something unspoken. As they reached a quiet spot by the water, Sam slowed down, finally stopping and looking out over the waves. He took a deep breath, as if gathering his thoughts, and then turned to face Lily. "Lily, can I ask you something?" he said softly, his tone serious in a way that caught her off guard. She looked at him, sensing that whatever he was about to say had been on his mind for a while. "Of course," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. He paused, glancing down at the sand before looking back at her. "This trip, I don't know how to say it, but it feels like something's changed between us. Do you feel that too?" Lily's heart skipped a beat, and she felt a surge of relief mixed with nerves. He felt it too. She wasn't alone in this confusing, unexplainable feeling that had been building between them. "Yes, I felt it too," she admitted, her voice barely audible over the sound of the waves. "I didn't know if it was just me, or I don't know." Sam nodded slowly, his expression serious but gentle. "I can't quite explain it, but it's like I've been seeing you in a new way, and it scares me a little." They both fell silent, the weight of his words hanging in the air between them. Lily didn't know how to respond. She felt the same way, but putting it into words made it feel even more real. Finally, she took a deep breath, deciding to be honest. "I don't know what it means, Sam, but I know that this has been different. Being here, spending time together like this, it's like it's changed something." Sam looked at her, his gaze steady. "I know. I keep thinking maybe it's just the trip or the setting. But then I wonder if maybe it's been there all along and we just never noticed it." His words hit her with a sense of clarity. Maybe this connection, this bond between them, had always been there, quietly waiting beneath the surface. But now, in the quiet of the beach, with nothing else around them, it had come to light. They stood there in silence, both struggling to make sense of what they felt, both scared and unsure of what it all meant. But in that moment, there was a strange sense of peace, a feeling that whatever happened next, they were in it together. After a while, Sam broke the silence, his voice soft. "I don't want this to ruin things, Lily. You're one of the most important people in my life, and I don't want anything to mess that up." Lily nodded, her heart aching at the honesty in his words. "I feel the same way. No matter what, I don't want to lose you." They shared a quiet look, the unspoken promise between them carrying a weight of its own. Neither of them knew what would happen after they returned home, but at that moment, they knew they didn't have to have all the answers. They just needed to trust that whatever happened, their bond would survive. And as they stood there, side by side, the waves crashing softly around them, they felt a sense of closure, a quiet understanding that carried them into the night. After a long pause, Sam spoke again, his voice softer this time, almost hesitant. "You know, growing up, I always thought I knew exactly who you were to me. You were family, but also more than that. You were someone I could count on, someone I respected." Lily looked at him, sensing the weight behind his words. "I feel the same way, Sam. I mean, you're the person I go to when I need advice, or when I just need someone to understand. You've always been there, no matter what." He nodded, his gaze distant as he looked out over the ocean. "I think that's what makes this so confusing. It's like, there's this line, and I never thought about it until now. But now that I feel it, I don't know what to do." She nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. There was a line, an unspoken boundary they'd always kept without thinking. And yet somehow, this trip had blurred that line, making everything feel unfamiliar and complicated. For a while, they stood there in silence, the sound of the waves filling the empty space between them. Lily felt a mix of emotions, relief that he understood, fear of the unknown, and a strange sense of comfort in their shared confusion. Finally, she took a deep breath and looked at him, deciding to be as honest as she could. "Sam, I don't know what this means, or if it even means anything. But I'm glad we talked about it. I was scared to say anything, but now that it's out there, I feel like we're not alone in this." Sam looked back at her, his expression softening. "Yeah, I was scared too, but knowing you feel it too, it's like it takes some of the weight off." They shared a quiet smile, a shared understanding passing between them. It didn't erase the uncertainty, but it made the feeling of isolation disappear, like a small light in a dark room. Sam took a step closer, reaching out to gently touch her shoulder. "No matter what, Lily, you're my family. I don't want anything to take that away." She felt her heart touch at the tenderness in his words, and she reached up, covering his hand with hers. "Me too, Sam. No matter what happens, we're in this together." They stood there hand in hand, the unspoken promise between them a quiet reassurance that whatever the future held, they would face it side by side. And as they finally turned to leave the beach, the weight they'd been carrying felt lighter, replaced by a sense of peace and understanding. Decision to separate. The next morning, there was a quietness in the air as Sam and Lily packed their things, preparing to leave the hotel and head back home. The evening before had left them both feeling lighter, yet also aware of an unspoken understanding. They needed time and space to process what had shifted between them. Their parents, busy packing up their own belongings, were cheerfully chatting about the trip and making plans for the next one. But for Sam and Lily, there was a bittersweet undertone, a recognition that the closeness they'd shared during this vacation couldn't continue in quite the same way. As they waited in the hotel lobby for their parents to check out, Sam glanced at Lily, a gentle look in his eyes. "Hey, can we talk for a minute?" he asked quietly. Lily nodded, following him to a small seating area near the lobby window. The morning sun was streaming through the glass, casting a warm glow across the room. But the atmosphere between them felt slightly heavy. Sam took a deep breath, his voice soft but steady. "I've been thinking, maybe it would be good if we had a little space when we get back, just to let things settle." Lily nodded slowly, though she felt a pang of sadness at his words. She understood what he meant, but the thought of pulling away from him felt strangely painful. "Yeah, I think you're right," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "It might be good to give ourselves some distance, at least for a while." They both fell silent, the weight of their decision settling over them. It wasn't easy, and a part of her wished they could just go back to the simplicity of before. But after everything they'd shared on this trip, they both knew things wouldn't feel right without giving each other room to breathe. Sam reached out, giving her hand a gentle squeeze. "It doesn't mean I'm going anywhere, Lily. I'll still be here. We'll just take it one step at a time." She looked at him, a small, grateful smile on her face. "I know, and thank you for being honest about all of this. It's what we needed." They shared a quiet moment, the understanding between them now grounded in the decision to honor the bond they had without letting it overwhelm them. It was bittersweet, but it felt right. On the drive back home, they sat quietly in the back seat, each lost in thought as the landscape passed by. Their parents chatted up front, recounting memories of the trip and talking about the next family vacation, oblivious to the silent journey Sam and Lily were sharing. As they got closer to home, Sam turned to her, giving her a soft smile. "You're going to be okay, right?" Lily nodded, her heart swelling with gratitude for his support. "Yeah, we'll both be okay." When they finally arrived, they unloaded their things and said their goodbyes, each heading to their separate rooms. The house felt quiet, almost too quiet, as Lily unpacked her suitcase, her mind still lingering on the memories of their trip. It was a strange feeling, returning to the familiar walls of her bedroom and knowing that everything was different now. She missed the easy conversations, the shared moments of laughter, and even the quiet tension that had lingered between them. But she knew this was the right path for both of them. Over the next few days, they kept their distance, each giving the other the space they needed. There were moments when Lily wanted to reach out, to text him or knock on his door, but she held back, honoring the decision they'd made. Slowly, she felt the weight of their shared experiences begin to settle into something calmer, something that didn't need constant attention, but was simply there, a quiet, enduring presence. One evening, just as the sun was setting, she received a message from Sam. "How are you doing?" Lily smiled. Feeling a wave of comfort wash over her, she replied simply, "I'm good. Hope you are too." It was a small exchange, but it reminded her that even with the distance, their bond was still strong. They didn't need to talk every day or spend every moment together to know that they cared about each other deeply. As she sat by the window, watching the last light of the day fade, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. This journey, with all its complexities and emotions, had brought them closer in a way she couldn't have anticipated. And while things would never be quite the same, she knew that the bond they shared would always be a part of her. A few days after they returned home, Lily found herself pacing her room, the silence pressing in on her. She hadn't seen Sam since they'd returned. She'd hear him occasionally, the soft creak of the floor as he moved around in his room, or the faint sound of music drifting down the hall. Yet, neither of them had reached out, each respecting the boundaries they'd set. One evening, she finally decided to break the silence. She sent him a simple message. "Are you free to talk?" His response came quickly. "Of course. Want to meet on the back porch?" Lily made her way outside, stepping into the cool evening air. Sam was already there, leaning against the railing, his expression calm, but a bit uncertain. She joined him, standing a few feet away, and for a moment, they both looked out into the yard, neither quite sure how to start. Finally, Sam broke the silence, his voice gentle. "I miss talking to you. It's strange, isn't it? We've only been back a few days, but it feels longer." She nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. "Yeah, I missed you too. I keep wanting to tell you things, little things like I always do. But then I remember." She trailed off, not quite sure how to put it into words. He looked over at her, a soft smile on his face. "Lily, it doesn't have to be all or nothing. We don't have to cut each other out just to figure this out." She looked back at him, relief flooding through her. "I'm glad you said that. I was worried we'd end up avoiding each other." Sam shook his head, reaching out to gently touch her shoulder. "You're too important to me for that, Lil. No matter what, we'll find a way to make this work." They shared a quiet look, the tension between them softened by the warmth of the moment. And as they stood there, under the fading light of the evening, they both felt a sense of calm settle over them, a promise that whatever happened, they would navigate it together. Over the next few weeks, they found a new rhythm. They gave each other space, but they didn't shut each other out. They'd share a cup of coffee in the mornings, chat about little things, and occasionally exchange quiet smiles that spoke volumes. It wasn't the same as before, but it was enough, and slowly, they began to feel a sense of normalcy return. Lingering emotions and new beginnings. The weeks slipped by quietly, and as the initial intensity of the trip began to fade, Sam and Lily each found ways to move forward. They didn't completely avoid each other, sharing small talks over breakfast, nodding to each other in the hallway, sharing a knowing glance. They'd carved out a new kind of closeness, one that allowed each of them the room to breathe and to understand the depth of what they'd experienced. One evening, Lily sat by her window, watching the sky change colors as the sun set. She found herself reflecting on their trip, remembering the laughter, the quiet conversations, and the connection that had surprised them both. Part of her missed the simplicity of those days, the feeling of having Sam so close, without walls or expectations between them. But now, back in her own space, she could see that this distance was important. It had allowed her to see him not just as family, but as a person she admired and respected deeply. And while a part of her missed the closeness they'd shared, she knew that their connection was too important to let it become something complicated. One night, as she was brushing her teeth, she heard a quiet knock on her door. She opened it to find Sam standing there, hands in his pockets, a hesitant smile on his face. "Hey, mind if we talk for a minute?" he asked softly. She nodded, stepping aside to let him in. They sat down on the edge of her bed, a comfortable silence settling between them as they both gathered their thoughts. "I just wanted to say thank you," Sam said finally, his voice quiet but sincere, "for everything. I know things got confusing for a while, but I wouldn't trade any of it." Lily felt a wave of emotion rise in her chest, and she looked at him, her eyes soft. "Me neither, Sam. It's something I'll always remember." He nodded, a small smile on his face. "It's weird, isn't it? How sometimes the most unexpected moments teach you the most about yourself." She nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. "Yeah, I feel like I see things differently now. Like, I've learned more about who we are and how we fit in each other's lives." They shared a quiet look, a sense of closure settling between them. And in that moment, Lily felt a deep sense of peace. Whatever they'd experienced, whatever connection had grown between them, it was something they would both carry forward, a bond that didn't need words or definitions. Sam stood, offering her a warm smile. "I guess I should let you get some sleep." She nodded, feeling a sense of gratitude for his presence. "Good night, Sam." "Good night, Lil," he replied softly, giving her one last look before he left, closing the door quietly behind him. As the days continued, they each found ways to grow into this new chapter of their lives. They both started spending more time with friends, diving back into their separate routines, finding new paths, and focusing on their own individual goals. Yet, no matter how much time passed, there was an understanding between them, a sense of quiet respect and connection that they both cherished. One evening, weeks after their talk, Lily received a text from Sam. It was simple. "How's everything going?" She smiled, feeling the warmth of his words, and replied, "I'm good. Just thinking of you. Hope you're well too." It was a small exchange, but it reminded her of the journey they'd shared, the silent promises they'd made to each other. They didn't need to see each other every day, or to be a constant presence in each other's lives, to know that they cared. And as she sat there, phone in hand, she realized that this was enough. Their bond had taken on a new shape, one that allowed each of them to move forward, to grow, while still holding on to the quiet understanding that had brought them together. In the following days, Lily felt a calm settle over her that she hadn't expected. She realized that their time together on that trip had given her a kind of clarity about herself, about Sam, and about the nature of their bond. They didn't need to define it, didn't need to put it into any box. What mattered was that it was real and steady, a connection that would endure no matter what. One afternoon, as she was rearranging some things on her desk, she came across a small shell she'd picked up on the beach during their trip. She held it in her hand, its rough texture grounding her in the memory of that day, of the quiet moments she and Sam had shared by the water. It was strange, she thought, how certain memories could be both so vivid and so distant, like a dream that lingers after waking. Holding the shell, she remembered the peace she'd felt as they'd walked side by side, saying little but feeling deeply connected, and as she placed it on her windowsill, she realized that the memory no longer carried the same weight. It had become part of who she was, a piece of her past that she could carry forward without it defining her. Later that evening, Sam knocked on her door again. This time, he seemed more relaxed, a familiar, easygoing smile on his face as he leaned against the doorframe. "Hey, Lil, I was thinking, maybe we could grab some coffee this weekend. Just, as siblings," he added with a playful grin, though his eyes held a softness that spoke to the journey they'd shared. Lily laughed, nodding. "I'd like that. A coffee date as siblings sounds perfect." He smiled, and for a moment, they shared a comfortable silence, both understanding that their connection had evolved. They were still family, still close, but now they each had the freedom to grow individually while knowing the other would always be there. As he turned to leave, she called out, "Sam?" He turned back, his expression curious. "Yeah. Thank you. For everything. I don't think I would have come to see things this way without you." His smile softened, and he nodded. "Same here, Lil. Guess we make a pretty good team." With that, he left, closing the door gently behind him. And as Lily sat there, a sense of peace filled her. They found a way to honor their bond without letting it hold them back. A new beginning, rooted in respect, trust, and the unspoken promise that they would always be a part of each other's lives. Final reflections. As time passed, Sam and Lily each embraced their paths forward. Life had settled back into a comfortable rhythm, yet they both knew that something within them had quietly shifted. Their shared experiences had given them clarity, a deeper understanding of themselves, and a sense of respect that would forever shake their connection. Lily found herself feeling lighter and more confident. The time she'd spent processing their trip had shown her how much she valued her independence, her freedom to grow. And while Sam's presence had been a part of that journey, she'd come to realize that her own path was just as important. She was content knowing that their bond didn't have to be defined or constrained. It simply existed, a constant source of strength. For Sam, the experience had left him with a renewed sense of purpose. He threw himself into his own goals, grateful for the clarity he'd found. And though he and Lily were no longer sharing every moment, he knew she was there, a steady presence he could rely on. They didn't need to talk every day to feel close. Each smile, each small exchange, was a reminder of the journey they'd shared. It was enough to know that no matter where life took them, they would always carry a part of each other forward. And as they moved on, each taking new steps in their own lives, they knew that the quiet, unspoken bond they shared would always remain, steady, enduring, and real.